Hello everyone, I'm Vinay and welcome back to AIChamp YouTube channel. In this video, we'll learn about functions. First, we'll learn what it is and then we'll see some important functions that are used in machine learning. So let's get started. So let us try to understand what a function is in mathematical terms. But before that, let us take one simple equation, y equals to x1 plus x2. Now from this equation, what we can see is if we get values of x1 and x2, so based on this, so x1 and x2, if we have these values, then we can calculate y. So there is some sort of relationship between y and x1 and x2. So in simpler terms, we can say that x1 and x2 are our inputs and y is our output. So the function is basically a relation between input values to output values. So ideally there can be multiple inputs but only one output. Multiple inputs, it can be 1, it can be 2, n number of inputs. So as the relationship, we can write f of x1 and x2 equals y, and this f of x1 and x2 is nothing but x1 plus x2. So in this case, this is the relation, that is f of x1 and x2, but it can be anything else also, like for example x1 into x2, or let us say 0.5 into x1 plus 0.7 into x2 plus x1 square, something like this. This relationship can be anything, but this relationship is based on the input values and it provides output value as y. So this f of x1 and x2, this is what we call as function. So if it takes only one input, we can call it as something like f of x equals to y. So y is our output and this is our function, and for certain value of x, we'll get y when we pass the value of x through this function or this relation. So now let us understand what is a target function. So this is related to machine learning. So let us just take an example of email spam and ham classification. So as you see your email provider, whatever email you get, if it is fine, then so there is this email. If it is fine, then it goes to inbox. If it is some sort of spam, then it goes in spam folder. So suppose if we have a certain function that is a target function. So what this target function will do is it will take input as the email data, whatever we pass to this particular function, and it will output whether or not this particular email is spam or ham. And one thing to notice is this will be always correct. So target function is basically our ideal function that we need to find out, so that whenever we send any email data or any input data, it will always give us the correct answer that we need. So this cannot be incorrect, it will always be correct. So this is our target function. So we cannot find it directly, but we assume that there is a certain target function which can be found out, which will always be correct. So now let us look at something called as hypothesis function. This is closely related to target function. So what this hypothesis function is, we know that this particular target function, we just assume there is one target function, but we don't know it yet. So since we do not know what this particular target function is, so what we do is we create a hypothesis function and we try to approximate the target function. So this can be incorrect also, but we try to find a certain function that is as close as this particular target function. So for example, let us say we get email data and we pass it through hypothesis function. We get spam or ham as output, but these are just predictions and need not be correct. So this hypothesis function is also called as model. So when we say that we are training a particular machine learning or deep learning model, we are basically training this hypothesis function. We are trying to find out this particular hypothesis function. Now let us look at loss function. So right now we know about target function and we know about hypothesis function. So they are closely related. So this is ideal function that we want to find out, and this is just approximation of target function. Okay. So loss function is used to determine how much of difference there is between the hypothesis function and a target function. So basically we try to find out error, some sort of error we try to find out that is there in this particular hypothesis function. So we don't have target function directly as it is, but what we have are the actual predictions. So suppose let us call y as actual predictions. Actual predictions as in they are true or correct, and there is y hat. So these are just predicted by hypothesis or model. We can say that these are predicted by target function and these are predicted by hypothesis function. So we try to find out the difference between y and y hat. So there are different type of loss functions. For example, for regression, we can use something called as RMSE loss function. For classification, we can use cross entropy. So basically this particular loss function tells us about the difference between y and y hat, basically the ground truth and things that are predicted by hypothesis or the model, machine learning model. Now let us try to understand what a cost function is. So cost function is similar to loss function, just that it is average of loss function. So for example, let us say that we have 10 data samples. So these are data samples, or let us call as email data, something like this. And we calculate loss for one particular data. So for example, this is suppose spam. So let us just write it as 1 for spam and 0 for ham. Let us just write it here 0 1 0, something like this. So these are ground truth, and then we predict some values. So let us say that this is 1, this is 1, this is 1, this is 0, and something like this. So we can see in this particular case that for this particular sample, the loss should be somewhere near to 0. For this, the loss should be greater than 0. So we cannot directly say that the value of loss function in this case should be 1. It totally depends on the kind of loss function that we use. But for the sake of simplicity, let us just write it as 1. This is the value calculated by loss function. This is also by loss function. So this is also 0. This is also 0. So all these are like each value is calculated using loss function. But when we average the loss function for all samples, we get cost function. So cost function is basically averaging out the loss function for all the data samples. So along with this, we also have something called as objective function. So objective function is any function that has to be minimized or maximized. So for example, cost function is one type of objective function because we want to minimize it. Basically, we want to reduce the error. We want to reduce. So this cost function actually tells how much error the hypothesis or the model has made. And if we try to minimize this particular cost function, then this error will be reduced and automatically the model or the hypothesis will get better at its task. So let us just summarize everything whatever we have understood till now. So we learned about function. So it is just a relation between inputs and output is always 1. This can be 1 2 3 multiple. Then we learned about target function. So target function is ideal function for our task and it always gives correct values, but this is unknown to us. So since this target function is unknown, we try to find the approximation, that is hypothesis or the model. So this is just approximation of target function. Then we learned about loss function. So loss function is just used to calculate error between ground truth and predicted values by hypothesis. So let us say ground truth is y and predicted values are y hat. Then this is some sort of function which tries to find out some difference between y and y hat. Then cost function is simply just average of loss function for n samples, and objective function is a function which has to be minimized or maximized. So I hope that you have understood well about all the functions. Thank you for watching this video. See you in the next one.